Hey there, it's Lara back with your weekly astrology forecast. This one is for the week of August 4th to the 10th, 2021. Thanks for being here. So you can find me at astrologymaven.com. My website's not up yet. Summer has been a shit show, but you know, it will be. It will be, I promise. So in the meantime, though, if you go there and you put your name and address in, you'll get notified of when that happens and when the course that I'm working on launches. And also, you'll get my free guide to working with the moon. So the link is below to astrologymaven.com and you can head over there. And if you're interested in getting a reading, because I've had quite a few people reach out to me and go, how do I do this when your website's not up? So we can make those arrangements for that to happen if you reach out to me either via email. So you can reach me at lara@astrologymaven.com. That's my email, my new email address. So if you were on the old mailing list, you won't get emails from me unless you sign up for the new one. So lara@astrologymaven.com is the email address you can reach me at. If you're trying to get a reading or information about that, or you can reach out to me on Facebook Messenger or Instagram DM as well. But I will tell you that sometimes I miss those messages just because I get so many messages and sometimes they get buried. So if you don't want that to happen, then the best way to do it is via email. Okay, so and if you're waiting for a reading from me, you're waiting to get that, then in your inbox, it should be on the way soon. Okay, it's been, as I said, a bit of a shit show summer here. And what tends to happen for us anyways is that we look forward to summer coming and then to some downtime, but there in reality usually ends up being very little actual downtime. I guess it depends on what you consider downtime. So we've had lots of opportunity for getting together with family and friends now that we've had some loosening on our COVID restrictions, and it's outdoor time, so that makes things a lot easier, right? And so grateful for that, definitely. And there's been some good times had at the lake and stuff, but there hasn't been a whole lot of getting a lot of sleep and just kind of quiet and that sort of thing. So, and this summer has been particularly intense that way for a number of reasons that you may or may not have heard me talk about if you've been listening to my channel for a while. So, we've been at the lake for a few days again, but we didn't get a lot of rest. Let's just put it that way. So, moving on though, we're here to talk about the astrology this week and what's happening. And the big thing we're focusing on is the upcoming new moon in Leo, which is happening on Sunday, August 8th. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. And there's just a couple of other things to touch on before I get there, and then we're going to dive right in to talk about the new moon, and we're going to go through each sign and we're going to talk about its impact on you personally. So speaking of where the moon is at, the moon today on Wednesday, August 4th, is moving from Gemini to Cancer later today, depending on when you're listening to this, right? This is August 4th, 2021. And then on Saturday morning, early in the wee hours of the morning, and I'm always using Eastern time zone here because that's my time zone, so you can adjust accordingly. But Saturday morning, it will move into Leo, and then on Sunday, we'll have that new moon in Leo. And then the moon will move off into Virgo on Monday. So just before the new moon hits on Sunday, we've got, on August 6th, which is Friday, we have the sun in Leo. It's still Leo season, right? The sun in Leo, loud and proud, squaring Uranus and Taurus. So, and they're both at 14 degrees. So the sun and Uranus will make an exact square, but it's still within very close range at the new moon. So I'm going to talk about that square from Uranus to the new moon in a couple minutes. So I'm not going to belabor that here, but it'll hit exact the square to the sun, and then the moon will join the sun, and the sun and the moon together will be in square to Uranus and Taurus. So that's the sort of the big signature of this new moon. So we're going to talk about the impact of that. And then after the new moon, so we'll circle back to the new moon in a minute, but on Monday the 9th, we've got Venus in Virgo opposing Neptune in Pisces at 22 degrees. So, you know, just a word about that. It's going to feel like maybe a bit of an escape for a day or so. You know, take a break if you can. Maybe kind of try to enjoy the vibe of Venus Neptune, but don't get too attached. You know, Venus Neptune can be, you know, bring us into a bit of a dreamy kind of escapist kind of mode. Which has its time and place, definitely. But just know that usually, oftentimes when Neptune is involved like that, it's whatever we're experiencing isn't necessarily real. Do you know what I mean? In the sort of material, tangible sense of the word. So, and Venus is in its fall in Virgo. So it doesn't have a lot of strength there, right? Because Virgo, we talked a little about this, I think, in the last video, which was the week before last, because I didn't do a video last week. But Venus in Virgo can be really focused a little bit on sort of nitpicking at the details, right? Of things in terms of Venusian matter. So it can be a bit of a downer to Venus, but there are some positives as well with Venus and Virgo. Venus and Virgo can be real craftsmanship, real you know, focusing on the fine tuning of making something quite beautiful. It reminds me of, like, you know, the simplicity of like shaker furniture or something like that. Can be Venus and Virgo. And I mentioned a few other things in the video I did a couple weeks ago, so you can go back and watch that if you want to know more. But so in a positive way, this sort of hit of Neptune to Venus and Virgo can be a bit of good medicine, right? For Venus and Virgo, if Venus and Virgo is getting a little wound kind of thing. It's a time to kind of, okay, let's take a step back and just relax here for a minute. So that's happening on Monday after the new moon. But we're still riding the waves of that new moon, of course, on Monday, right? And then on Tuesday, we're going to have Mercury and Leo opposing Jupiter in Aquarius. There's a lot going on the Jupiter-Aquarius axis these days. On the Leo-Aquarius axis these days, right? Because it's Leo season. There's a lot of planets moving through Leo. And then, of course, we've got Saturn in Aquarius still, and Jupiter has just moved back into Aquarius for the remainder of this year. So Mercury opposite Jupiter at 28 degrees of Leo and Aquarius. And so this can be like a day or two where there's some sort of like kind of expansive maybe news that comes in. We get something that's like, you know, big news, or there are big ideas floating around. That's sort of the focus. But with oppositions, right? An opposition, there's this need to kind of like compromise, to bring things together, to balance in a sense. And, you know, there can be this bit of a push-pull energy. So in this case, that push-pull or that need for compromise or balance is between the details, right? Mercury versus the big picture, Jupiter. So, you know, the kind of fine-tuning and the, let's look at, you know, the big, wide perspective. And, you know, we want to not favor one over the other. Let's put it that way. So let's circle back to the new moon in Leo, that's happening on Sunday. I'm going to try to show you the chart across like across the miles here where the camera is. I don't even know how well you can see that. I contemplated not putting it up because there's shadow and such, but you might be able to see over here we've got the sun and the moon together in Leo at 16 degrees, and then there's Uranus in Taurus over here at 14 degrees, right? And also the one other thing I just wanted to point out is up here we've got Saturn in Aquarius at 9 degrees. And Mercury is also in, proximity to the sun and the moon in Leo there. So at 23 degrees. So within about, 6 degrees of this new moon. So Mercury plays a role, but the big focus is that square to Uranus. So that's what we're really going to focus on. You may or may not know that new moons are always sort of an inception point, right? It is when the sun and the moon come together in the sky to conceive of something new. We can think of it as birthing something new, but it's really, a new moon is almost like the moment of conception in a sense. So it's that time in the monthly cycle, in the lunar cycle, when the yin and the yang, like the lunar energies and the solar energies, the other ways to language that might be the more active and the more passive energies, or the, if you like the sort of divine masculine, divine feminine energies, and I'm not using those terms like in terms of gender, right? It's a quality of energy. So when those two energies come together to conceive of and birth something new. And it's a time in the monthly cycle when we set intentions that are in line, with whatever we'd like to see grow or see fulfilled over the next 2 weeks, come the next full moon. And in this case, the next full moon is on August 22nd, and it happens to be the second full moon in a row in the sign of Aquarius, right? So, which is unique. And if you didn't listen to the video on the new moon in Aquarius that happened at the end of July, at the 1st degree of Aquarius, it would be really good to go back and listen to that, because these 3 moons in a row are kind of this story. And so there is some kind of like a beginning, endings and beginnings that happen around that new moon at the end of July. And then here we are at this new moon, right, in Leo on August 8th. And then we're going to have another full moon at the last degree of Aquarius, kind of wrapping things up, this portion of the story anyways. So it would be good to listen to that video and this one. And then of course, when I do the one on the new moon, the next full moon on August 22nd. So as I was saying, right, whatever intentions that we set should be aligned with what we want to fulfill, the fruit we want to bear over the next 2 weeks at the next full moon, whatever that full moon is. And then in this case, it's in Aquarius. And then also, over a longer period of time, over the next 6 months, to the next full moon in Leo, in the same sign as whatever the new moon was in. In this case, that's Leo. And so the full moon in Leo will happen February 16th, 2022. So whatever you are initiating or instigating or conceiving of around the time of this new moon, think about, what do you want to accomplish over the next couple of weeks? But then in a more long-term sort of, plan, what do you want to play out over the next 6 months? Where do you want to be in 6 months from now in relation to the intentions that you set to whatever you began at this new moon in Leo? So think about that. And the most potent intentions to set are obviously, like at any new moon, are related to whatever sign the particular moon falls in, right? And in this case, that's Leo. So Leo, the sign of creative force, of confidence, of ambition, of leadership, of loyalty, of, you know, generosity, and also, you know, the sign of drama and attention seeking and, you know, sometimes kind of entitlement and that sort of thing, right? Every sign has its light and its dark side, so to speak. So it's light side and its shadow side, right? So we always have to keep that in mind. But so when we're setting intentions, we want to keep in mind what sign is the new moon happening in, and also when we're talking about our individual intentions, we want to focus on the house that particular sign falls in. So what house is Leo in your chart? And we're going to get to that when we go through each sign. So each of us has the sign of Leo in a particular whole sign. I'm using whole sign houses here in case you're wondering, in our natal chart. So the themes of that particular house are the life areas that we would do best to focus our intentions on. And so, and like I said, we're going to focus on that when I take you through each sign and give you your horoscope for this new moon. But just before we do that, you know, I just want to give you a few details about this. I want to expand on some of those details about this new moon. So first of all, we already know the sun and the moon are coming together like at all new moons. And this is happening at 16 degrees, right? I think it's 16 degrees or 14. I have to go back. No, 16 degrees. So it's Uranus that's at 14 degrees Taurus. So within 2 degrees of exactly squaring the new moon, right? So the sun is at home in Leo. It's in its domicile there, right? So it's at home. It has strength there. It's comfortable there. It has all the tools it needs to do its job, to take care of Leo business. And so the sun has a strength at this particular new moon. And then, as I mentioned a couple times here, this new moon is in a tight square within 2 degrees. We consider that a pretty tight square to Uranus and Taurus, right? And Uranus and Taurus is still within 5 degrees of exactly squaring Saturn in Aquarius. And as you probably know by now, if you've been listening to the astrology, if you've been paying attention to the astrology, to me or to other astrologers, the Saturn-Uranus square is the defining signature of 2021. It is the backdrop. It is the background hum of, it is the canvas that everything else is being painted on in 2021. It's also a player in 2022, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. But so this Saturn-Uranus square, like, we can't really escape it, right? Whatever tension is going on between Saturn and Uranus collectively, and so on a more collective level, we're talking about themes of old and new. We're talking about tradition versus innovation. We're talking about structure and rules versus liberation and freedom, right? Just to kind of put it simply, to put it, to distill it down. Those are Saturn square Uranus themes. So this is, obviously, we're seeing this happen out in the world in a multitude of ways, but we're also feeling it in our own lives. We're feeling this tension. A square is a conversation of tension where something's got to give, right? That tension needs to go somewhere. And the best way to deal with the tension of a square is to take action, and to do it sort of like intentional, conscious action, because although we cannot, and I've spoken about this many times before, you know, we cannot control everything. If we are acting with some sort of like awareness and consciousness and intention, and I don't mean that in a kind of out there way, you know, I mean being sort of aware of what is going on in our lives and how we are reacting to that, or making our decisions on the day to day. So, you know, if we can do that, then the tension of a square tends to be more productive. Whereas if we kind of just, resist or push against the tension, or refuse to kind of like do anything about it, and we just kind of like stay stuck there, you know, in that kind of tight corner, then inevitably life happens, and we may react in ways that are not productive, that may actually be destructive in some way, that may actually cause damage to ourselves and others, right? That may like we can end up sort of like imploding or exploding, sort of thing, if we're not acting with conscious intention. So that's a square, and that's that Saturn square Uranus. That's just, like I said, the background hum of the year. And so this is playing a role in this new moon. So we may have some, like, you know, some whispers of that Saturn square Uranus, or it may be more obvious for some of us than others, depending on our chart, right? But the major influence in this case, in this particular new moon, is Uranus in Taurus, because it's within 2 degrees of squaring the new moon. And it's about halfway through its journey through Taurus at this point. You know, it's just about at that 15-degree mark. So it's about halfway through. So we should have some indication of what changes, you know, Uranus is trying to get us to make, what disruptions Uranus is having in our lives, in the Taurus house of our chart. And you know, the idea here is to not resist that, but rather to embrace it, embrace the change. So Uranus and Taurus is definitely shaking things up, right? Shaking up the status quo when it comes to Taurian things. So our resources, our material, you know, world, and our relationship to the material world. Taurus is kind of like that which sustains us. It's the earth itself, right? And so there have been shakeups, collectively and personally, to all kinds of things. The disruption in the food chain, you know, the major biodiversity collapses that are happening, the focus on, you know, climate change, like all of these things, right, on a grander scale. And then in our personal lives, the foundations, the structures, the bottom line, you know, that which sort of sustains us, our relationship to the earthly material world that we know, is being disrupted in some way, right? And as I'm going through each of the signs, I'll speak to that. I'll speak to the house that Taurus sits for you, and where that disruptive focus, you know, is coming from. So just to boil it down, this new moon sees new beginnings, because it's a new moon, but it may feel, these new beginnings, whatever new beginnings are happening for us, may feel disruptive, chaotic, you know, shocking, different, unexpected, but also liberating, also perhaps innovative and insightful in some way, right? It can also be the influence of Uranus. And so the idea is to try to sort of embrace the change, because Uranus shakes things up whether we like it or not. So embrace the change, and try to, we've got the sun in Leo, right? We've got the sun there. So try to kind of shine through that as best as you can, through those changes that are happening and that want to happen. And sometimes, you know, the changes are changes we want to make and we're making intentionally. And sometimes they are things that are beyond our control, that we have to respond to. Changes that we may not really be in favor of, or we may not feel our what we really want, but sometimes, you know, the universe has other plans for us. So those folks that have natal placements around the mid degrees of the fixed signs, I'm laughing because, yeah, this is my husband's chart. Like, it's unbelievable, actually. He's got a lot going on at this right around that point, and so we're definitely feeling that in our household, right? Lots of changes on a professional level have been, and just like things coming out of left field and ups and downs, and which are impacting like life in general. So, but those with natal placements around the mid degrees of the fixed signs, so that's hovering around the kind of, you know, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 degrees of Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio, are likely to feel this energy with more intensity, maybe on a more personal level, right? And, you know, the fixed sign, you've heard me say this, but the fixed signs are really getting getting hit with a lot of late. And so hang in there. In the end, you know, it is the ultimate goal of Uranus and Taurus is to liberate us, is to give us more freedom in some way, shape, or form. But Saturn there in Aquarius is saying, but you can't just, you know, flip over the table and like, you know, there has to be some kind of order to it. There has to be patience, there has to be maturity, there has to be responsibility involved, that kind of thing, right? So we're going to take it through the signs now. We're going to talk about the house that this new moon is sitting in for you. So those themes of that Leo house are the themes where you want to kind of consider, like, what do you want to plant? What seeds do you want to plant there that you will nurture and ideally grow over the next, you know, in shorter terms over the next couple of weeks, but in longer terms over the next 6 months to that February full moon that happens in Leo, February 2022. So think about that, you know, what your intentions are. And remember that, you know, if we really want something, intention is only half the story, right? It's only half the magic, shall we say. You have to back up your intentions with action. That's the way the world works. We can't sit back on a meditation cushion and manifest things. There's going to be a lot of people that are probably going to say, you know, that's not true, or don't, you know, kill my buzz, or you know, kill my dreams or whatever. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have those you know, intentions. And like, I've been down that path. I've explained this to you before. I've been way down that path of spiritual, what I now know to be spiritual bypassing, and, you know, toxic positivity and The Secret and all of this kind of thing. I've been way down that path. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, you know, did all the reading, I did all the courses, did all the things. And eventually, you know, none of that was wasted, because eventually I learned and I understood that, and I matured, you know, to a point where I really grasped that the intending is only half the story. You have to match that with action. And also that, you know what, some things are just not meant to happen in this lifetime. So you know, anyway, so that's Saturn, right? That's Saturn talking. You know, I'm kind of like slowly approaching my second Saturn return. So with age, ideally comes wisdom, and I'm trying very much to embrace that role kind of thing of the wise crone, of the wise elder. It's not, if you would have seen me on Sunday night, you would have I was behaving anything but wisely. But I digress. Anyways, you know, I'm what I'm trying to say here is the intentions that you're setting have to be backed by action. So, to give you the best shot at getting where you want to go, at achieving what you want to achieve. So, when you think about what you want to achieve, think about not only what you want to achieve, that's really important, right? To get real specific about it, but also what's it going to take for that to happen? What do you have to actually do, right, for that to happen? And then, so we'll talk about the house that the new moon's happening in, those themes, and then I'll touch on where is the square from Uranus happening? Where might you see some sort of surprise or disruption or call for liberation or freedom in your life, or call for innovation in some way, right? And how those two things can be, how that can be in a bit of tension with your intentions for this new moon, and how can you innovate? How can you work through that, in some way? So, and perhaps using the lessons of Saturn, that we talked about, the patience, the step-by-step approach, the endurance, the maturity, the responsibility, the lessons hard learned, and awards hard won. So we're going to start in this instance with Leo, because I always start with whatever sign this is happening in the first house for, because these are horoscopes based first and foremost on your rising sign. So if you, in a general forecast like this, so if you know your rising sign, then listen for that first and foremost. But you can also definitely listen for your sun sign, and you can listen for your moon sign as well. And those will give you sort of added layers of information, right? But the rising sign in a general forecast in particular is the most reflective of your actual life and your chart. So, okay, we're going to start with Leo. So Leo, for you, this is your new moon. Whether you're a Leo sun and you're listening to this is your birthday month. It is your new moon for your birthday year. Or if you're a Leo rising, this is happening in a very important part of your chart. It's happening in the first house. So the first house, which deals with you, which deals with your, how you sort of come at the world. It is your character. It is your, it has to do also with your physical vitality. The first house is sort of that inception point. It's like where we come in to the world, right? And how we show up, kind of thing. And how we, our physical bodies are in relation to the world. And, so this, the first house, although the sixth house is the house often associated with illness and health, the first house has a lot to do with our physical body, our physical vitality, our physical appearance, those kinds of things. But it's also very much about how we approach the world and how the world perceives us, right? So this is where this new moon is happening for you. So when you're thinking about the intentions that you may wish to set, then focus those intentions on those themes. You personally, your life, you as an individual, you and how you come at the world and how the world perceives you. And I mean that in like full spectrum, right? Because it has to do with how does the world perceive you? Not that this is the be all end all, but it does have to do with like your physicality, right? And how you relate to your physical body? Like, are you feeling strong and well in your body? Are there things that, you may want to focus on or address there? Or, it could just be things like, your sort of outwardly appearance. Like, do you want to get a new, hairstyle? Do you want to change up the wardrobe a little bit? You know, these kinds of things are all first house related, but how you come at the world and how the world perceives you, right, is very much first house. So that's where the new moon is happening. Then you've got this square from Uranus and Taurus in your 10th house. So there's something going on here in terms of the outer world, in terms of your career, in terms of, I like to refer to this as like sort of the legacy you wish to leave. The 10th house is a very public house. It has to do with public life and what the world kind of, what you put out into the world, and what you may be kind of remembered for in some way. It's a career house. It's a house that has to do with authority and authority figures. So your relationship to authority figures or your own authority, right? It can also have to do with, parental figures and like that are authority figures in some way as well. So Uranus in that 10th house is shaking things up. I'm going to tell you from my own personal experience, with a husband who is a Leo rising and has a shit ton of planets in Scorpio, another fixed sign. And I have 2 kids who are Leo suns. So I've seen this, like I've seen what's going on here. And, from my, just in relation to my husband, I already mentioned this one, but there's so much change going on in his professional life. And so that's Uranus and Taurus in that 10th house, disrupting things, shaking things up, wanting to liberate you, from the way things have always been in some way, shape, or form. And that can be in a bit of tension with your first house, with your vitality. Like, Sean is working so much these days, right? And all hours and fingers in lots of pies and lots coming at him. And so that's taxing on the physical being. So just to put it in real world terms, it can be something as really straightforward as that's going on for you. And so, do what you can with this energy. Set some intentions about maybe, slowly but surely improving things for yourself and doing things differently and in a new way in relation to those first house themes. Despite the shakeups and the pressure that's being put on you from that 10th house, from that Uranus and Taurus, right? Use the slow, steady Saturn approach here. And think about, like, what do you want to achieve just in the short term over a couple of weeks, but more like, where do you want to be in 6 months from now, or in relation to those first house themes? Okay, so I'm going to leave that there for you, Leo. I'm going to move on to Virgo now, where Virgo, you have this new moon, and I'm a Virgo rising, so speaking to myself here too, we have this new moon happening in our 12th house. Right? And the 12th house speaks to things like rest, relaxation, retreat, isolation, solitude, self-sabotaging behaviors, the unconscious. It can have to do with endings and losses, and it can have to do with some schools of thought say the 12th house has to do with far, far, far away places. I haven't necessarily seen that in my own experience. However, I'll throw it out there. But it can very much also have to do with like places that are tucked away from the world, right? So in literal terms, like retreat centers, rehab facilities, hospices, hospitals, prisons, detention facilities, all those kinds of things, right? Um, but you can think of it as a sort of retreat away from the everyday in whatever form that takes. So that is where the new moon is happening for Virgo rising. And so the intentions that you set that you want to see come to pass, say within the next couple of weeks in a shorter term, or within the next 6 months in a longer range, right? Should revolve ideally around those 12th house themes. So for example, for me, I really increasingly see the need for, having some kind of a retreat in the true sense of the word. Like the, the downtime I'm getting is not fulfilling me. It's not sustainable. It's not enough. It's not adequate. And so I feel like there needs to be, like, I need to somehow figure out, I need to innovate, think about it a different way. Uranus and Taurus, and the 9th house in this case, Virgo rising, which is, our ideas and thoughts and perceptions about things. It's also teaching and learning. It's also travel and foreign people and places and what we learn from other cultures. It can be armchair travel. It can be, publishing and that sort of thing, but very much about sort of like expanding our horizons, right? Is the 9th house. So it's like thinking about things, innovating, that Uranus and Taurus, innovating in some way in order to work through this tension, in order to actively solve this problem of not enough retreat, of it could be solve this problem of maybe some unconscious behaviors, or some subconscious things that are not being that are needing to kind of surface to be dealt with. Some potentially even there could be something going on in your life, if you're a Virgo rising, around endings, around convalescence in some way, around it could even be people in your life that are in, like, say, long-term care. There could be something like that going on, and it's demanding a lot of you. And that Uranus in the 9th house is wanting to liberate you in some way, and for you to kind of shift the way you're thinking about this, or shift your perspective in some way around whatever that is. So, like, another thing, and I'm using myself here because this is my life and this is what's going on. I've been trying to get my website up, my new website up, and my course, the initial course anyways, launched, and that kind of thing, which is very 9th house, right? And to innovate and do things differently than I have in the past there, which is Uranus in the 9th house. But I'm having a hard time finding the space for that, quite literally, in my household, but in my life, finding the space to retreat and take the time away to get that done. And so I have to kind of start to think about that in a different way, and set some intentions for where I want that to be over the next couple weeks and over the next 6 months, right? So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. And you can apply that, if you're a Virgo rising, to whatever's going on in your own life, right? And set those intentions around the 12th house themes. Like, it could be some kind of self-sabotaging behavior that's really dragging you down in some way, and you know, which could be a 12th house thing. It could be a spiritual thing in the 12th house too, right? And so the new moon is encouraging you to come at that in a different way, or to maybe start a new spiritual practice or something like that as well. And you know, like, could be learning about a new spiritual practice, taking that on, right? In some way, which is the Uranus and Taurus piece. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there, Virgo. I've said a lot, and I'm going to move on to Libra, where we've got the new moon for you happening in your 11th house. So Libra, this new moon is planting or asking you to plant some new seeds or to set some intentions. It's you know, conceiving of something new in relation to your friends, to your supporters, your allies, to the wider kind of group, to your hopes and dreams for the future. So there is something going on here that, you know, is looking for a new way to do this, a new way to come at it, a new way to see it. And there's pressure from the 8th house, which is where Uranus and Taurus is. There's a lot of disruption and need for liberation and freedom, and perhaps need for innovation going on in the 8th house, which has to do with other people's resources. So those can be your partner's resources. That can also be things like taxes, insurance, loans, debts, scholarships, mortgages, wills, inheritance, these sorts of things. It can very much have to do with your entanglements with other people in general, right? And that's partly why the 8th house is related to this notion of the deep psyche and psychological sort of wounding and healing. The 8th house is the house of deep transformation, where we've got, you know, this cycle of death and rebirth reflected there. So that's where Uranus is shaking things up for you, Libra. And there is some tension going on between that Uranus and Taurus and, you know, this new moon that's happening in the 11th house. And so there may be some surprising developments take place in relation to the 8th house that then impact or allow for or encourage a fresh start, or you know, doing something new in relation to the 11th house themes, like I said, of your allies and supporters and friends and the wider group, and that kind of thing, your hopes and dreams for the future. So I'm trying to think specifically how this could be playing out for you. So potentially, this can be things like group investments. I don't know why I just thought of that, but you know, this could be things like there are some entanglements, disruptive entanglements going on that are impacting your friendship groups or your allies in some way. This can even be things like you've been dealing with maybe like an insurance company or something like that. That's been a like real pain in the ass in terms of being things coming out of left field, and a lot of like you know, shock and awe factor, or you've had to innovate in some way in that regard, or you just want to free yourself from that in some way. And you know, so you maybe there's an opportunity for some kind of new, dealing with a new kind of like, I don't know, insurance group or something like that. You know, it could be something something along those lines, like you're starting something new in relation to something, you know, you're aligning yourself with, or there are allies in a wider group. Like this could be a company even in the 11th house. It could be friends though, very much, that, you know, but there's this difficulty or this disruption going on in relation to the 8th house. Or maybe it's like, I don't know, let's take it in a different direction. Maybe something like you want to do something new and different in terms of like some kind of alliance or friendship group, but there's things in the eighth house. It could be like debt that's preventing you from doing that, or something going on with your partner's resources, or you know, a some kind of a issue around like inheritance or something like that. That's you know, upsetting the apple cart that you've been having to deal with. So that's what's going on. So the intention, the area of intention for you though, is that 11th house, right? That I spoke about. So that's for you, Libra. I'm going to move it on to Scorpio now. Scorpio rising, Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon. We've got this new moon happening for you in your 10th house. So very public house in the chart, right? The top of the chart. So the new moon is encouraging you to set intentions, is asking you to conceive of something new in relation to your career, to say your public life, your public reputation and persona, how the you know, like what you will be remembered for. So the legacy you wish to leave. Your authority and relationship to authority figures, you know, including your own authority. So this is where the new moon is happening for you. And these are where your new moon sort of intentions should be focused on. But of course, you've got Uranus and Taurus over there in your 7th house of one-to-one close personal relationships. That is being a bit of a shit disturber. That is disrupting things. But is also calling for freedom and liberation in some way, for you to do things differently in partnership, whether that be you know, a close personal like marriage partner or significant other, close friends and family members, or business associates, or rivals can play a role here too in the 7th house. And Uranus and Taurus is disrupting those relationships. It's calling for you to do things differently there, to maybe liberate yourself in some way, to innovate in some way. And there's tension there between that Uranus and Taurus, and in square with this new moon in the 10th house, right, of your public life and your career and such that we mentioned. And so, you know, it could simply be that like you're trying to get something off the ground career-wise, and you know, your close relationships are being impacted, and you have to do things differently there. You have to innovate, or you are wanting some freedom in relationship in some way, and your career or your public reputation or your you know, your relationship to authority is, you know, craving some newness, but there's this interplay there, you know. So like there could be things going on when we're talking about the 7th house. There could be things going on with your partner, or with like a business partner, or you know, a close friend or family member, or a marriage partner, or with a rival even, that are disrupting your life in some way, that you know, are the changes are happening with that person, and it is, you know, it can be, hi Nigella, it can be disruptive. But there could also be just this craving for doing things differently in relationship, right? And there's this, like, it could be a business. I'm thinking a lot. It could be having to do with business, business partnerships for a lot of people, because this 10th, 7th house axis really speaks to that, like your career and close relationships. So it could be like, you know, taking on new business partners, or something along those lines could be happening. Yeah, so I think that that is really enough to go on, Scorpio. You're looking at setting those intentions though, and doing, you know, something new in really in relation to your 10th house, and then you kind of have to deal with the 7th house disruption and to innovate some way, right? And the idea here is, what would Saturn do, right? We've got that Saturn playing a role all year in square to Uranus, and so Saturn's saying, slow and steady wins the race. You know, patience, grasshopper. Just, you know, be responsible and mature and reliable and all of that, and things will work out in the end. So that's for you, Scorpio. I'm going to move on to Sagittarius now. I have a cat trying to get out of the room. So Sagittarius, for you, this new moon is happening in your 9th house. So this is a new moon, and your new moon intentions to be focused around the bigger picture, your perspective, your worldview, you know, your philosophy and belief system, and also around potentially things like higher learning, teaching, publishing, travel, foreign people and places, foreign cultures, and you know, the things you learn from people who are different from you. So that's the new moon. That's what we're focusing on. And you know, you might be able to hear some people talking outside right now. The window's open, but so that's where your intentions should focus. But there is some disruptive factor going on in your 6th house, which has to do with health and illness, your daily routine. You know, it's that sort of house that I always think of as sort of checking off the ticky boxes. But the 6th house is like, it's labor intensive. It's the house of hard work. It's the house where we have to, you know, it's like the daily grind and the daily slog. And it's like, you know, a lot of work and not necessarily a lot of quick reward that happens. And so, and there can be like health disruptions potentially going on for you. And, you know, so you want to start something new, like maybe, let's try to make it real here. Maybe you know, maybe you're trying to start like a new course of study, or you're trying to launch a class, or you're wanting to take a trip, or you know, you're working on publishing something. You know, those are just some different 9th house potentials. But there's something going on in relation to your health that is being disruptive in some way, or something about your daily routine, and the work you have to do on the day-to-day, something about your work life in general. And that can be paid work or unpaid work. That is a bit of a, you know, it is looking for you to innovate. It wants to liberate you. It's this area of your life that it, you know, is seeking more freedom. But that's intention with these new moon intentions, right? It's like, I want to do XYZ, you know, in relation to those 9th house themes. But then we've got this like surprises, disruptions, this call for liberation. How can we work within those parameters, right? How can we make it work? How can we take conscious action to resolve the tension there? And we have to keep taking it back and thinking about Saturn over there in Aquarius, and what Saturn's asking of us this year, which is, you know, patience and determination, and you know, to a degree, kind of like taking the mature, responsible approach, and really putting the work in, kind of thing. So that is that's what's happening for you, Sagittarius. And I think I've said enough there. You know, I mean, just one more example I could think of off the top of my head would be something like you are wanting to say, I think I already used the example of like launch a course or something like that. Um, it could even be like, like you're trying, or your intention is to kind of shift your perspective, or to expand your horizons in some way. But then this sixth house, Uranus and Taurus thing there is shaking things up, and it's kind of like rocking the boat a little bit and making that a bit tense. So again, it's a matter of working through that tension, right? All right, so I'm going to move on, Sagittarius. I'm going to move on to Capricorn now, where we've got the new moon happening in your 8th house. So for you, Capricorn, this is a new moon where you're setting your intentions around 8th house themes of a variety of things in the 8th house, but most notably, we often think of this notion of other people's resources. So this is like other people's time, money, energy. And in a practical sense, it can be things like dealing with taxes and insurance and wills, inheritance, mortgages, loans, bursaries, scholarships, these kinds of things, right? Resources that come to you through like partners in some way, business partnerships, that sort of thing. But also, the 8th house is it's just our general entanglements with other people and our intimate connections with other people, and how those can impact our psyche, right? Psychological wounding and healing, and trauma experiences. And, this idea of like the cycle of death and rebirth in the 8th house. So like my personal catchphrase for the 8th house, that I think I coined this term. I've never heard anybody else use it. Is our entanglements with other people. So anyway, that's where the new moon is happening for you, and it's about like setting some intentions around that. So maybe this is like something new happening in terms of like, I don't know, insurance or taxes or a mortgage, or something new happening in terms of maybe you're wanting to kind of release yourself from certain entanglements, and do things differently there, and but there is this Uranus and Taurus in the 5th house for you, which is disrupting the status quo. It is, you may want some liberation and freedom there, but there's also this like this disruption, like changes and are happening that maybe sometimes come out of left field, or that feel like they're really shaking the foundations of things, and it can be quite disruptive. And so that 5th house has to do with things like children, and or childbearing, with pregnancy, with creative force in some way, your creative projects, your creative self-expression, with what sparks joy for you, the fun things in life, how you have fun in life in general, what brings you pleasure is 5th house. And so there's this tension going on here, and it could be like there are entanglements with other people that are happening, or that you're something new is beginning there, but there's this wanting to liberate yourself in some way, like, you want to maybe have more fun, or you're trying to shake up how you have fun, or there's something going on with your kids that may feel a little bit disruptive at times, or there needs, you need some, you're craving a little bit of freedom there in some way, but then, there's things like school to pay for, say, in the 8th house, or there's like your intention. Let me try to think of a different example. So it could be like, I don't know why. Sometimes things just pop into my head, and this will obviously pertain to very few people, but there could be some like kind of inheritance situation going on that involves children. It could be, or a will situation. Like, okay, so maybe you don't have a will and you're crafting a will, and then there's this, you have to consider children in some way, or there is. The eighth house is complicated sometimes to articulate. There could be issues around childhood trauma, even. I can see this fifth, eighth house dynamic going on. Or issues around, take it in a different direction. Like what sparks joy for you, or what, how you have fun in life, is being disrupted, or there's a need to disrupt that, or you want to be liberated, you want some change there in some way. But then the eighth house, like maybe you're dealing with like some kind of like, again, an insurance issue or a tax issue, or some obligation there in terms of other people's resources that is feeling, like it needs to be done differently at this new moon. So the idea is to set the intentions around the eighth house themes. What do you want to grow over the next couple weeks, but also, in the longer term, over the next six months, when it comes to those eighth house themes. All right, I'm gonna leave that there, Capricorn. I'm gonna move to Aquarius now. Aquarius, for you, this new moon is happening in your seventh house of your close personal relationships, right? Your one-to-one relationships. Those are things like your marriage partner or your significant other, or your business partnerships, or your rivals, your competition kind of thing, or contracts and agreements. So, which I never mentioned to Scorpio, but because they also have a seventh house dynamic playing out. But nevertheless, for you, Aquarius, this is where the new moon is happening, is in your seventh house. And so there is something new beginning here, something new being initiated, or something new for you to initiate or set your intentions on in relation to those seventh house themes that I just mentioned, right? Most notably relationships, contracts and agreements. But in your fourth house of home, family, place of living, roots, real estate, ancestry, parents, parental figures, oftentimes mother figures, your sense of emotional security, there has been some disruption, some change, some sudden, or there's a need for innovation there to do, there's a need to liberate yourself in some way. And, but that may be in tension with a personal relationship. So in some way, shape, or form, or a contract and agreement, so like I think of things like you're signing a new contract, but it's impacting your, I don't know, ability to maybe like put down roots in some way, or it's impacting family in some way, or close personal relationships. You're beginning a new relationship, or you want to, but there is this need to kind of liberate yourself from maybe family of origin, in a sense, or there's some kind of connection between your, like a close personal relationship and, say, real estate, for example. And so there's tension here. How can you work through this tension, right? You want to set the new moon intentions in relation to the seventh house relationships, but there's also this disruption, or this need for disruption, or this desire for innovation or liberation in your fourth house of, again, home, family, roots, all of that I mentioned, right? So how can you work through these things? How can you work through this tension? And the answer this year to most questions seems to be, what would Saturn do? Saturn at its best. Saturn encouraging us to be mature and responsible and patient, and to take it step by step, and to play the long game, right? That's what is required here. So think about whatever potential scenario is going on for you in relation to this fourth house, Aquarius, and set those new moon intentions around your seventh house, those seventh house themes, and then, play the long game. So that's what's going on for you. Also, don't be surprised if disruptions happen, I will say as well. That's what's going on for you, Aquarius. And as a fixed sign, you're feeling there's a lot of tension going on for you these days. You've got Saturn and Jupiter back in your sign now. Hopefully Jupiter there is giving you a bit of a buffer and a bit of support between now and the end of the year. So that should be something, at least, right? Okay, I'm going to move on now to Pisces. Pisces, for you, there is a new moon happening in your sixth house. So for you, this is a fresh start, a new beginning. This is new intentions being set, new seeds being planted in your house of health, illness, daily routine, hard work, the work you do on the day-to-day, paid or unpaid, your sense of sort of obligation and service in some way. And then you've got this disruptive energy in your third house of siblings, of your community, your immediate environment, which can be like it can have to do with people, like I said, siblings, cousins, neighbors, teammates, peers, that sort of thing. But also your neighborhood or things that are in close proximity, like short distance travel is the third house. Things like marketing and communications fall into the third house. Things like, schooling, teaching and learning, usually of like the early years variety, right? Or the beginner variety. So all of those things are third house. There's disruption going on there. There's a need for innovation there. There's a desire to liberate yourself in some way in relation to those third house themes. And that is at the time of this new moon in tension with your sixth house of again, health and well-being, and also like the daily grind and, hard work and those things that I mentioned. So how can you work through this tension, right? And like I keep saying to everybody, the answer seems to be try to keep in mind what Saturn would do and in being patient and mature and responsible and putting one foot in front of the other, and utilize that Uranus and Taurus energy to actively innovate in some way. So for you, your new moon kind of intentions, you want to focus those on maybe your health routines or your daily routine, or your dealing with some sort of illness or ailment that's been plaguing you, with your work, your daily work. And think about, what do you want to see happen in the short term over the next couple of weeks, right, to the next full moon, but also in the longer term over the next 6 months. What do you want those sixth house themes to look like for you in 6 months from now? So, and then, how can you work through that need for innovation, or through that disruption of Uranus in your third house in Taurus, right? So, like, this can be like I don't know, one of the things that comes to mind here is it could be like a sibling who's dealing with something that is impacting your health in some way, or your daily routine in some way. It could be, communications that are happening that are in tension with your daily work. It could be like technology. Sometimes the third house speaks to technology as well. And so there could be some like disruptions there in terms of technology impacting your work, and there's a real need for like you want to do some things differently in terms of your daily work or in terms of your health routines and that kind of thing. um, and there's this maybe this technology piece that's playing a role there, right? And a need for innovation there somehow, and those things are in tension at the time of this new moon. Okay, so I think I've said enough there, Pisces. I'm going to move on to Aries now, where we've got the new moon happening in your 5th house. So for you, Aries, this is a new moon in relation to, children, to your creative pursuits, to what sparks joy for you and how you have fun in life, what brings you pleasure. Those are all 5th house themes. And so the idea here is to set your new moon intentions around those themes. How do you want that area of your life to look in 2 weeks time, but in a longer sense in 6 months time, come the full moon in Leo, right, in February. And then, but there is something going on here in terms of a disruption in the 2nd house, because Uranus is in Taurus in your 2nd house of your personal resources, of your finances, the money you make from your skills and talents, of your time and energy, any kind of resources you use to get your basic needs met, what sustains you, sort of thing. It can also have to do with your sense of like, what do you value, and your sense of self-worth. And the 2nd house can sometimes even be like right down to the basics of like how we feed ourselves, but it's very much about, it's a very much a financial house, a resource house in the 2nd. And so there's some disruption that's been happening there, and a need to innovate, right? And a need to liberate in some way. And this can be in tension with whatever new thing is happening or wants to happen, or that you are trying to conceive of in relation to the 5th house. So this is like one of the main things that jumps out at me when I look at this configuration is like kids and money. And there could be like expenses that come out of left field that have to do with your children in some way, or money things that come up, right? Or there could be a real want and a need to get out and have more fun and to do things that bring you more joy and more pleasure, but there's a disruption in resources, or again like a need to liberate or do things differently there, right? And so how can you work through that tension is the idea here. And how can you kind of deal with the disruption? How can you intentionally innovate those 2nd house themes, right? And remember that Saturn is still pretty closely involved here, and so we want to think about how would Saturn at Saturn's best approach this? Well, with maturity and responsibility and patience, and with a knowing that slow and steady wins the race kind of thing. So that's what's going on for you, Aries. One other thing that just popped into my head that may pertain to some people is, this could be like, wanting to do something creative, but there's some kind of resources involved here, or what you're placing value on is in there's a disruption there, and it's kind of in tension, or it could be like I see this even as like somebody who wants to conceive or is trying to get pregnant, and maybe is having to, like, there's some financial things that are going on that are making that difficult kind of thing, right? So how can you innovate? How can you work through that potential tension that's going on there? Okay, I'm going to leave that there for you, Aries. I'm going to move on to Taurus now. Taurus, for you, this new moon is happening in your 4th house. So for you, that is related to your home, your family, your place of living, your roots, your ancestry, real estate, your sense of emotional security, parental figures. I usually see it as mother figures or like nurturing figures in your life, but family very much. And so there's something new on offer here, or something new that you want to do or accomplish, or begin, some new seeds that are wanting to be planted in this fourth house, some new intentions to set there. But then there's this disruptive energy in your first house. Uranus and Taurus, your sign, in your first house, right? So it's there can be a lot of changes going on and disruptions in relation to you and your physical vitality, right? Your physical body. It could even be your physical appearance, but also how you come at the world and how the world perceives you is very first house. You as an individual, right, is first house. And so there could be something going on here, like maybe a lot of highs and lows in terms of your energy levels, even, that is disrupting family life potentially, or maybe something going on with you physically that is disrupting your wanting to set down some new roots, or to deal with a family issue, or to find a new place to live, or something along those lines. Maybe there could be something like you're wanting to kind of come at the world differently, or be seen differently out in the world, approach the world differently, show yourself differently in some way, shape, or form. And this could even just be like as simple as your appearance, but there's something, disrupting that, or you're disrupting, intentionally. You're making disruptions to your appearance or something like that, or you're wanting to liberate yourself from, the old you, maybe. And, but there's also this, like, you want some kind of like roots, maybe fourth house. You've got some family, something that you're intending in terms of family, in terms of like place of living, in terms of ancestry, that's wanting to get off the ground, that's wanting to grow. But there's this tension between, that and your first house. And so how can you work through this tension, right? How can you innovate? But also, how can you balance that innovation and that need for liberation with Saturn's approach of being patient, of doing the hard work, of slow and steady wins the race, of maturity and responsibility, and all of those things, right? Those Saturnian things. So that is what's happening for you, Taurus. And I'm going to move on to Gemini now, where we've got the new moon happening in your third house. For you, Gemini, this is a new moon that revolves around your community, like your immediate environment is the third house, so, and the people in it. So this can be siblings, cousins, neighbors, peers. This can be short distance travel in the third house, like short jaunts and short commutes that you take, short trips. This can be about communication. This can be about marketing and commerce. And moving parts. It can even be about vehicles or technology in some way in the third house. And so there's something new, like you want to set these new intentions. You want to plant some new seeds. You're conceiving of something new in this area of life, right? But in your 12th house, there's some disruption going on, which has to do, that's Uranus and Taurus in the 12th, which has to do with, like, this can be disruption behind the scenes. This can be disruption behind closed doors. This can be disruption from your subconscious, or from self-sabotaging behaviors and bad habits, and potentially even addictions. This can be disruptions from endings and losses that are happening. This can be or need to liberate yourself or innovate there in relation to any of those themes, and how you, 12th house could be like how you retreat, how you rest and spend time in solitude. It can be about isolation in some ways. It can be about places that are kind of tucked away from the world, right? Like hospitals and long-term care facilities and rehab facilities and spiritual retreat centers and prisons, and all of these things fall into the 12th house. So disruptions, changes, a need for liberation there in that 12th house, but then something new that you want, that you're intending, that wants to happen in relation to the third house themes that I mentioned. And so these two areas of life are in tension, right? So how do we work through this tension? And think about, where do we want to be in 2 weeks at the next full moon, but where do we want to be in 6 months from now at the full moon in Leo on the longer term? And this is kind of like, I see this as playing the long game because of Saturn's involvement here. And so we want to kind of think about what would Saturn do, right? And we want to think about at its best how Saturn is patient, and Saturn wants us to be responsible and mature and do the hard work, and knows that the step-by-step approach is the best way to go. And so it's working with those energies in order to conceive of something new in relation to those third house themes. So this might involve, I'm trying to give some real life examples here, this might involve like siblings in some way, let's just say, but then there's this element of things going on behind the scenes that is disruptive. Like this could be this can even be like school, third house. Like usually it could be like a teaching and learning environments that are more early years, like not so much kind of higher learning environments, but learning the basics. It could be like elementary school, daycare, even high school, or learning something like learning the basics of something, and you're wanting to do something different there, but then there's this 12th house disruption that I spoke about, right? And it could be, you could be your own worst enemy potentially, or it could be, that there are some unconscious things that need to be dealt with, or that there's just a real need for retreat, or that some disruption is happening that's that's throwing you off kilter in terms of something that's going on, again, behind the scenes, or in relation to one of those 12th house themes I talked about. Okay, so there we have it, Gemini. And last but not least in this instance, we've come to Cancer. So Cancer, for you, this new moon in Leo is happening in your second house. So this is a new moon that revolves around some fresh start that you're intending, or you want to intend, or that you're conceiving of, new seeds to plant in relation to your personal resources, your time, your energy, your money, and your material possessions potentially too. So, this is like, the second house is like where we get our basic needs met and how we go about doing that, right? And in our modern world, that often revolves around money and how we make money. But how we also like nourish ourselves, sometimes in a very real sense through food, but, and what we value and place worth on, and our own sense of self-worth. So this is the new moon for you, like, and you're thinking in terms of planting intentions, in relation to this area, that you want to see grow over the next couple weeks, but also, in the long game over the next 6 months to the full moon in Leo in February. But there's something going on here with regards to your 11th house, where Uranus in Taurus is sitting and disrupting things a little bit, right? Or calling for freedom or innovation or liberation in some way. And that 11th house has to do with the group. It has to do with the collective. It has to do with friends, allies, supporters, your hopes and dreams for the future. And so there can be some, shock and awe factor that's happening in this area of life, or just some general disruption, or just a real need to do, like I said, to do things differently here, to innovate, a need for freedom there in some way. And so the second house, where the new moon is happening, and the 8th house are in tension with each other at the time of this new moon. And so how can you work through that tension in a most productive kind of way? And I see Saturn as being a key in terms of, being a player that wants us to follow the rules in some way. And that doesn't mean like, Uranus is there saying disrupt the rules, but Saturn's saying you can't just like flip the table over, like I said in the intro. But it's like, you know, Saturn knows that a slow, steady approach is the best approach. It's the most sustainable. It's what builds a strong, lasting foundation. Saturn wants us to be responsible and mature and to do the adulting, right? Saturn wants us to, Saturn knows slow and steady wins the race. And so ultimately there's an element of that that can help us work through this tension. So, you know, for you, this could be about, like when I just look at what houses this is happening in, this could be about money and friends in some way, shape, or form. This can be about money and your hopes and dreams for the future. This can be about how you make your money in relation somehow. Like there's a wider group dynamic that's disruptive in some way, shape, or form, right? There are, like, what sustains you on the day to day or what you value is in tension with maybe your supporters or your potential allies, that kind of thing. So that is what's happening for you, Cancer. And that is all 12 signs for this new moon in Leo. And I hope that you found this somewhat insightful. Leave me your comments below, and definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I'd appreciate that so much. And if you hit the like button, and if you share with anybody who might like to hear my horoscope ramblings. And I will hopefully catch you next week. All right, amidst the chaos, I will try to make time. So take good care, and all the best to the new moon, on the new moon, to you. All right, bye for now.